The galaxy was on the edge of chaos. Across many star systems, a force like no other was making its way closer, an inferno born from a dying star. This wasn't an ordinary fire, but one fueled by the catastrophic energy of a supernova. It was moving across space with an unimaginable speed, consuming everything in its path. No technology, no weapon, and no force in the galaxy had ever encountered something like this. Planets that had existed for millennia, teeming with life, were now facing a destruction they couldn't avoid. The alien civilizations, known for their advanced knowledge and powerful technologies, were helpless. They could do nothing but watch as the fire closed in. The alien planet of Zorath, once a vibrant hub of intelligence and power, was now only days away from being consumed by the Inferno. The people of Zorath were advanced masters of science and technology, but this was beyond their abilities. As the flames neared, panic began to spread through the city-states. The alien governments scrambled, trying to find a solution, yet their best minds came up empty-handed. They had used lasers to try and stop the fire. They had tried energy barriers to block it, and they had even attempted to change the atmosphere itself, but none of it worked. The fire just burned hotter, faster, and without mercy. In the heart of Zorath, inside a vast command center, a group of alien leaders gathered, their faces filled with fear. Their planet's surface was already beginning to heat up, the skies turning red as the fire approached. The air was thick with dread. They stared at the screens, showing a map of their planet's slow but inevitable destruction. Nothing works. "We cannot stop it," one of the leaders said, his voice trembling. There was silence in the room, and the fear was so thick it was almost palpable. But then, one of the alien commanders spoke up. Perhaps we should call for help." He said the words as if they were an afterthought, but it was clear that the idea had caught everyone's attention. They had to make a choice. They had to try something, anything. "There is a species," the commander continued, "a species from a distant planet called Earth. They are known for their resilience in the face of disasters. I've heard stories of their firefighters, humans who, against all odds, have battled wildfires on their own planet. They may be our only chance." The room went quiet. The idea seemed absurd at first. How could humans, a primitive species, do what no advanced civilization could? But then, the desperation of the moment set in. "Send for them," one of the leaders ordered, his voice flat and resigned. And so, without hesitation, they made contact. A transmission was sent across the stars to Earth, and soon they received a response. On Earth, Captain Lyle Forsyth, a seasoned firefighter, was finishing his day. Lyle had fought fires across the globe, from massive wildfires to dangerous building blazes, but he had never seen anything like what was being asked of him. The message was clear. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations needed his help to fight a fire that couldn't be stopped. At first, he had doubts. He was only one man, one firefighter. What could he possibly do against a fire that was literally consuming whole planets? But then he thought of his team, of all the firefighters who had worked with him over the years. They were used to challenges, big ones, dangerous ones, ones that most people would never even consider facing. Lyle didn't hesitate. He agreed to lead the mission, knowing that no one else could handle it. A human firefighter, armed with nothing but his skills, his knowledge, and his unshakable resolve, was going to fight a fire that no one else could. The journey to Zorath was long, but Lyle's determination never wavered. As his ship approached the planet, he saw the vast expanse of space dotted with burning stars. The approaching Inferno was visible now, its fiery glow bright and threatening. When he finally landed on Zorath, he was met by a group of alien firefighters who looked at him with doubt in their eyes. They had never seen a human before, and they couldn't believe that someone so small and seemingly weak could help them. But Lyle didn't care about their doubts. He knew what needed to be done. "Are you ready?" one of the alien leaders asked, his voice filled with skepticism. "We'll find out," Lyle said, his calmness almost eerie in the face of such a devastating threat. "Where's the fire?" The alien team showed him the data, and Lyle studied it carefully. The fire wasn't like anything he had seen before. It wasn't just heat, it was radiation, the force of the supernova itself, and it was spreading faster than any normal fire could. The flames were alive, almost sentient in their ferocity. But Lyle didn't let fear take hold. He knew how to fight fire. "We can't stop it head on," he said. "We'll need to think differently. We have to control it, trap it, and force it to burn in a way that's manageable." The aliens looked at each other, confused. They had tried everything they knew, and it had all failed. What could this human possibly have in mind? Lyle didn't waste time explaining. He just got to work. The first step was to understand the fire's behavior. He set up observation points around the planet, using the alien technology to track the spread. He quickly realized that the fire wasn't a normal blaze. It was reacting to the planet's atmosphere, the energy from the supernova itself. It wasn't just spreading out of control, it was feeding off the planet's natural energy, growing stronger with every passing hour. "Okay," Lyle said to his team, "we're going to need to change the environment. This fire needs fuel, and if we remove that fuel, we can slow it down. We'll use the landscape mountains, valleys, and even oceans to create barriers." The alien firefighters still had doubts, but they followed Lyle's lead. Under his command, they set to work, carving out trenches, creating barriers, and setting up cooling systems. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. Slowly, the fire began to change its direction, no longer flowing uncontrollably across the surface of the planet. Lyle's plan was beginning to show results, and the aliens were starting to believe. But the fire wasn't done yet. It would grow, evolve, and strike harder than ever. Lyle knew that they were only beginning to fight this battle. And as he stood on the edge of the planet, looking at the approaching flames, he felt something deep within him, a connection to the fire itself. It was the will to survive, the same will that had kept him fighting through the hardest days of his life. And he knew no matter what came next, he would not let this fire win. The alien firefighters looked on in disbelief as Captain Lyle Forsyth and his human team worked tirelessly, setting up equipment and preparing to face the impossible Inferno. The planet of Zorath, once a peaceful world, was now on the brink of annihilation. A fire unlike anything anyone had ever seen was racing toward it, fed by the unimaginable power of a supernova. For days, Zorath's leaders had thrown every tool and resource they could think of at the flames, but nothing worked. The fire grew stronger with each passing moment. Then came the message for help, a desperate plea that had reached across the stars to a planet called Earth. When Lyle had arrived, the alien team had been skeptical. They didn't believe one human could do what an entire galaxy of advanced species couldn't. Lyle's calm and composed demeanor stood in sharp contrast to the panic surrounding him. The aliens were quick to judge, thinking that his human methods would be as outdated and ineffective as they imagined their own technology had become. The distrust was thick in the air as Lyle briefed them on his plan. "We're going to do this together," Lyle said, looking out over the vast horizon of Zorath, where the fire could now be seen in the distance, slowly creeping closer. "You've got the technology. We've got the will to fight. If we combine them, we might stand a chance." The aliens, who'd been watching with doubt and confusion, exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't want to admit it, but they knew Lyle was right. They had failed in every attempt to stop the fire. As much as their advanced technology had been their pride, it had been their downfall in this case. The fire was unlike anything they had studied before, unpredictable and relentless. They needed something they hadn't accounted for: human ingenuity. Despite their hesitation, the alien leaders gave in. They decided to follow Lyle's lead, though it was with reluctance. Their pride had taken a blow. How could they, with all their advanced technology, need a human to save them? But the urgency of the situation left no room for ego. Time was running out, and they had no choice but to try whatever Lyle suggested. As Lyle set up his plan, he turned to his team. "We've got to work fast and make every moment count. We can't afford to waste time or resources. I need your focus." His team of humans, though unfamiliar with the alien technology, were used to fighting against the odds. They had faced down blazes so hot. The alien team watched from a distance, unsure how to contribute. They had been trained in advanced firefighting techniques using lasers, energy barriers, and cooling agents, but nothing seemed to have any effect on the fire. The alien engineers, who had once been so confident in their designs, felt like novices standing in front of a force they couldn't comprehend. But Lyle never hesitated. He simply adjusted his strategy with calm precision. "We need to create a diversion," Lyle said, "something that can momentarily distract the fire from spreading further. We can't defeat it head-on, but if we can slow it down, we might have a chance." The aliens still didn't fully understand, but they trusted Lyle's confidence. Together, they set up a series of large reflectors designed to redirect the fire's radiation back toward its source. It was a risky plan, one that no one thought would work. Even Lyle knew that. But sometimes, it wasn't about making the perfect plan, it was about making a plan that gave you the best shot. The reflectors were powered up, and the plan was set in motion. The moment they activated the system, the fire seemed to pause, its advance slowing just for a moment. The alien team gasped in astonishment. It was working. But Lyle wasn't done yet. He knew that the fire wasn't just a physical presence, it was also an energy force, a wave of destruction that moved in unpredictable patterns. To beat it, they would have to think beyond their technology. Lyle turned to the alien engineers. "I need to redirect the flow of energy. Can your systems help me control the planet's core temperature?" They exchanged worried looks. It was possible, but it had never been done before. The aliens had never dared to try to control their planet's core. Such a task was beyond even their understanding. But Lyle, seeing their hesitation, pressed on. "We don't have time for doubts. We need to move now or it's all over. I know it's risky, but sometimes taking a risk is the only way forward." The alien engineers reluctantly agreed. Together, they initiated the system, adjusting the planet's core temperature to stabilize the energy flow. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it gave them a fighting chance. For the first time, the fire seemed to stop expanding. It wasn't retreating, but it wasn't advancing either. Lyle stood, staring at the fire as it hovered at the edge of the containment zone they had created. He knew it wasn't over, but it was the first glimmer of hope they had seen since the disaster had begun. But just as they thought they had gained a brief moment of victory, a new challenge emerged. The energy waves from the fire began to interact with Zorith's atmosphere in strange ways. The fire's heat was now creating powerful magnetic storms that threatened to destroy their equipment. The alien team grew anxious. They didn't understand how to counter this new threat. Lyle, however, remained calm. He had faced disasters before, and this was no different. The key, he knew, was to stay focused and to keep adapting. He turned to the alien leaders. "We need to work together. There's no room for hesitation now. If we don't unite our efforts, we won't survive this." His words were blunt, but they struck a chord with the aliens. They'd been reluctant allies at first, but in this moment, they understood what Lyle was asking. They had no choice but to put their pride aside. The alien engineers adjusted their systems, creating energy shields that would stabilize the magnetic storms. It was a long shot, but it was the best they had. Slowly, the atmosphere began to calm. The magnetic storms began to subside, and the fire, still fierce but contained, no longer seemed so unstoppable. As they stood together, Lyle looked at the alien firefighters. They were no longer reluctant allies. They were partners in this fight. It had taken the fire threatening everything they knew for them to realize what true strength was: unity in the face of the impossible. The battle wasn't over. The fire was still there, just a few miles away, threatening to consume everything. But for the first time, the alien team felt the fire lose some of its power. And that feeling, small as it was enough to drive them forward, to keep fighting, and to know that they had a chance. Together, they could fight this. Together, they might just survive. Captain Lyle Forsyth stood at the edge of the desolate, fiery wasteland, his gaze locked on the inferno that continued to spread. The alien team, once reluctant allies, now worked with newfound urgency, understanding that time was no longer a luxury. The fire, still an unstoppable force, raged across the surface of Zoreth, threatening to consume everything in its path. The alien leaders had long given up on conventional methods of fighting fires. The lasers, cooling agents, and energy shields had all failed. What they faced now was a force of nature that no one had ever seen before. But Lyle, the human firefighter, had a different approach, a plan that no one had considered. The heat from the fire burned intensely, radiating waves of energy that distorted the atmosphere around them. Despite their advanced technology, the aliens were powerless to stop it. But Lyle, in his calm yet determined manner, continued to formulate his strategy. He understood the fire better than anyone. To him, it wasn't just a threat, it was a puzzle, one that could be solved if he could just think beyond traditional methods. But as the fire moved closer, the pressure mounted, and Lyle knew that if his next steps didn't work, Zorath would fall. He couldn't afford to fail, not now, not when so many were counting on him. The alien engineers had set up a series of massive cooling towers, hoping that they could reduce the temperature enough to slow the fire's advance. But as Lyle watched, he saw that the fire was not simply burning the surface of Zorath. It was drawing energy from deep within the planet, feeding on the core itself, growing stronger with every moment. Lyle's mind raced as he processed the information. This wasn't just about heat, this was about the fire's relationship with Zorath's core energy. The fire wasn't just consuming, it was being fueled by the planet's own life force. "Captain," one of the alien leaders called, his voice trembling. "We have no more time. We need to stop this now, or the entire planet will be destroyed. Is there anything you can do?" Lyle turned to face the alien leader, his expression calm but filled with an intensity that only years of fighting fires could have taught him. "We need to change the fire's energy source. If we can stop it from drawing energy from the core, it will lose its power." The alien leader looked confused. "But how? We've tried everything. Our best scientists have tried to manipulate the core, but we can't control something that powerful." Lyle nodded. He understood the difficulty. But as a firefighter, he had learned to think unconventionally. He had seen fires that seemed unbeatable, fires that consumed entire forests, mountains, and cities. But he had also learned that sometimes the most dangerous fires weren't the ones you fought directly. Sometimes the key was understanding the fire's behavior and using it against itself. "We can't control the core directly," Lyle said slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon, "but we can create a diversion. We need to disrupt the fire's ability to feed off the core. I need you to help me create a feedback loop, something that will redirect the fire's energy flow." The aliens stared at him, unsure of what he meant. They had never heard of such a plan. But Lyle's determination was infectious, and slowly they began to understand. They had the technology, but it had never been used in this way. With Lyle's guidance, they set to work. Together, they modified the cooling towers to act as energy conductors, channeling the fire's heat into a series of energy absorbers. The plan was to redirect the fire's energy back into the planet's core, but in a way that would weaken it. Wasn't a perfect solution, and Lyle knew that. The fire was unpredictable, and nothing was guaranteed. But they didn't have the luxury of time to create a flawless strategy. This was a race against the clock. The cooling towers hummed to life. The fire seemed to pause, just for a moment. The feedback loop worked, but it wasn't enough. The fire roared again, its flames surging forward with greater intensity. The energy absorbers had helped to slow it, but they hadn't stopped it. Lyle's heart sank. He knew they needed more, something that would completely disrupt the fire's energy flow. The alien engineers worked furiously, adjusting the equipment to increase the feedback loop's power. But even as they did, Lyle realized that they were approaching the point of no return. The fire was already too close to the planet's surface. If they didn't act quickly, Zorath would be consumed. "We need to amplify the diversion," Lyle said, his voice steady. "We have to force the fire to burn in a different direction, something that will make it lose its connection to the core entirely." But the aliens hesitated. The idea was risky, almost too risky. Amplifying the diversion meant creating a massive energy disturbance, something that could destabilize the planet. But Lyle knew they didn't have a choice. The alien engineers hesitated for only a moment before they followed his command. They recalibrated the energy absorbers, turning them into massive energy conductors. The fire, already threatening to overtake them, suddenly shifted direction. The energy from the core began to flow differently, causing the fire to lose its power. It wasn't completely gone, but the advance slowed. For a brief moment, it seemed like they had succeeded. The fire stopped spreading, and the feedback loop held. But Lyle wasn't fooled. He knew the fire would evolve, adapt, and strike again. And when it did, they needed to be ready. "We have to keep adjusting," Lyle said urgently, his eyes scanning the alien terrain. "We can't let the fire find a way around the energy loop. If it does, we'll lose everything." The alien team worked without hesitation, now fully committed to Lyle's strategy. The atmosphere crackled with energy as they amplified the feedback loop even more. The fire, sensing the disruption, roared again, its flames writhing like a living creature trying to break free. It was then that Lyle realized the true nature of the fire. It wasn't just a simple blaze. It was a force that thrived on chaos, on destruction. But if they could channel that chaos, they might just be able to control it. As the final adjustments were made, the fire began to lose its intensity. It was still there, lurking just beyond the edge of the containment zone, but it was no longer an unstoppable force. For the first time, Lyle saw a glimmer of hope. The fire was retreating not by force, but by clever manipulation. "We've done it," one of the alien engineers said, awe in his voice. "We've actually done it." Lyle allowed himself a brief moment of relief. They had won for now. But as he looked at the fire, he knew it was only a temporary victory. The fire would adapt again, but now they had a strategy, a way to fight back, a way to survive. And in the face of such an overwhelming force, that was all they could ask for. The air was thick with tension as Captain Lyle Forsyth stood at the center of the war room, his mind racing with possibilities. The fire, a monstrous and unstoppable force, had begun to weaken, but the danger was far from over. The alien leaders, their faces pale from stress, gathered around him, looking for answers. They had seen the damage, felt the heat, and understood the enormity of the threat. This wasn't just a battle against fire, it was a fight for survival. And now, as they prepared for the final confrontation, every decision Lyle made could mean the difference between life and death. "We're running out of time," Lyle said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "The fire is adapting faster than we anticipated. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything." The alien commanders exchanged uneasy glances. They had never faced a threat like this. Their technology, advanced beyond anything humanity had ever imagined, had been useless against the fire's relentless spread. Lyle, however, had one final plan, a strategy that he knew could either stop the fire or doom them all. "I have a way," Lyle continued, his eyes locking with each alien leader's gaze. "We've been fighting this fire the wrong way. We've been focusing on controlling it, but what if we could use its energy instead of trying to contain it? What if we could turn the fire against itself?" A murmur of disbelief swept through the room. They had never considered such a strategy. The fire, born from the planet's core, was more than just heat. It was a force that thrived on destruction. How could they possibly use that to their advantage? Lyle's fingers tapped against the surface of the table, his thoughts racing. "We know that the fire is drawing energy from the core. What if we could redirect that energy back into the planet, but in a way that destabilizes the fire's power? If we do this right, we can sever its connection to the core and make it burn out on its own." The room fell silent. The concept was risky, perhaps even reckless, but Lyle was their last hope. The aliens didn't have the time to argue. They had to act. One of the commanders, a tall alien with glowing blue eyes, stepped forward. "We'll follow your lead, Captain Forsyth. If this is our only chance, we'll take it." Lyle nodded grimly. They didn't have the luxury of second chances. The fire was already. Captain Lyle Forsyth stood at the edge of the desolate, fiery wasteland, his gaze locked on the inferno that continued to spread. The alien team, once reluctant allies, now worked with newfound urgency, understanding that time was no longer a luxury. The fire, still an unstoppable force, raged across the surface of Zorath, threatening to consume everything in its path. The alien leaders had long given up on conventional methods of fighting fires. The lasers, cooling agents, and energy shields had all failed. What they faced now was a force of nature that no one had ever seen before. But Lyle, The human firefighter had a different approach, a plan that no one had considered. The heat from the fire burned intensely, radiating waves of energy that distorted the atmosphere around them. Despite their advanced technology, the aliens were powerless to stop it. But Lyle, in his calm yet determined manner, continued to formulate his strategy. He understood the fire better than anyone. To him, it wasn't just a threat, it was a puzzle, one that could be solved if he could just think beyond traditional methods. But as the fire moved closer, the pressure mounted, and Lyle knew that if his next steps didn't work, Zorath would fall. He couldn't afford to fail, not now, not when so many were counting on him. The alien engineers had set up a series of massive cooling towers, hoping that they could reduce the temperature enough to slow the fire's advance. But as Lyle watched, he saw that the fire was not simply burning the surface of Zorath. It was drawing energy from deep within the planet, feeding on the core itself, growing stronger with every moment. Lyle's mind raced as he processed the information. This wasn't just about heat, this was about the fire's relationship with Zorath's core energy. The fire wasn't just consuming, it was being fueled by the planet's own life force. "Captain," one of the alien leaders called, his voice trembling. "We have no more time. We need to stop this now, or the entire planet will be destroyed." "Is there anything you can do?" Lyle turned to face the alien leader, his expression calm but filled with an intensity that only years of fighting fires could have taught him. "We need to change the fire's energy source. If we can stop it from drawing energy from the core, it will lose its power." The alien leader looked confused. "But how? We've tried everything. Our best scientists have tried to manipulate the core, but we can't control something that powerful." Lyle nodded. He understood the difficulty. But as a firefighter, he had learned to think unconventionally. He had seen fires that seemed unbeatable, fires that consumed entire forests, mountains, and cities. But he had also learned that sometimes the most dangerous fires weren't the ones you fought directly. Sometimes the key was understanding the fire's behavior and using it against itself. "We can't control the core directly," Lyle said slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon, "but we can create a diversion. We need to disrupt the fire's ability to feed off the core. I need you to help me create a feedback loop, something that will redirect the fire's energy flow." The aliens stared at him, unsure of what he meant. They had never heard of such a plan. But Lyle's determination was infectious, and slowly they began to understand. They had the technology, but it had never been used in this way. With Lyle's guidance, they set to work. Together, they modified the cooling towers to act as energy conductors, channeling the fire's heat into a series of energy absorbers. The plan was to redirect the fire's energy back into the planet's core, but in a way that would weaken it. It wasn't a perfect solution, and Lyle knew that. The fire was unpredictable, and nothing was guaranteed. But they didn't have the luxury of time to create a flawless strategy. This was a race against the clock. As the cooling towers hummed to life, the fire seemed to pause, just for a moment. The feedback loop worked, but it wasn't enough. The fire roared again, its flames surging forward with greater intensity. The energy absorbers had helped to slow it, but they hadn't stopped it. Lyle's heart sank. He knew they needed more, something that would completely disrupt the fire's energy flow. The alien engineers worked furiously, adjusting the equipment to increase the feedback loop's power. But even as they did, Lyle realized that they were approaching the point of no return. The fire was already too close to the planet's surface. If they didn't act quickly, Zorath would be consumed. "We need to amplify the diversion," Lyle said, his voice steady. "We have to force the fire to burn in a different direction, something that will make it lose its connection to the core entirely." But the aliens hesitated. The idea was risky, almost too risky. Amplifying the diversion meant creating a massive energy disturbance, something that could destabilize the planet. But Lyle knew they didn't have a choice. The air was thick with danger, and survival was a daily battle. Yet, one human stood out among the rest, not for his advanced gadgets or military prowess, but for his courage and determination. Captain Evan Holt, known as the Firefighter, was humanity's last line of defense against a disaster that no one had ever seen before: the Inferno. The Inferno was a wildfire of unimaginable power, born from the planet's core and amplified by unnatural forces. It wasn't just any fire. It moved with intelligence, as if it had a mind of its own, destroying everything in its path. No one knew how to stop it. The fire had consumed vast stretches of the planet. Captain Holt had seen it all. He had fought fires in every corner of the world, but this was different. The Inferno didn't just burn it, tore apart the very fabric of reality itself. With each passing day, the flames grew stronger, more aggressive. The last few survivors had retreated into fortified cities, but even they were beginning to lose hope. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Captain Holt stood on the edge of a cliff, watching the distant glow of the Inferno. He had seen the fire's destruction firsthand, and its relentless advance had haunted him every night. The sky was filled with dark clouds of ash, and the air smelled of charred earth. It seemed like the end was near. But Holt wasn't ready to give up. He knew something had to be done. There was no way this fire was going to claim everything he had fought for. He had a plan, but it was risky, dangerous even. No one had ever dared to challenge the Inferno directly, but Holt knew that sometimes, to save a world, you had to face the impossible. He returned to the command center, where a small group of alien and human engineers worked tirelessly, trying to find a solution. The air inside the facility was sterile, buzzing with the hum of computers and the chatter of scientists. As Holt entered, the room fell silent. They all knew what was coming. "You've been working hard," Holt said, his voice low but steady. "But we need to stop waiting for a miracle. We need to create one." The chief engineer, a tall alien named Xor, looked at him with concern. "Captain Holt, it's a force of nature beyond our understanding. Even our best technology can't get close enough to analyze it." Holt nodded. He understood the risks, but he also knew that the fire wasn't going to wait for them to figure it out. They had no more time to waste. "I'm going in," he said, his voice firm. "I'll face it head on." There was a long pause before Xor spoke again, his tone filled with disbelief. You're going to enter the Inferno? Are you sure you understand what you're saying?" Holt's eyes burned with determination. "I don't expect to come back. But if I don't try, we'll lose everything. I can't let that happen." The team exchanged glances, their fear evident. Holt knew they cared for him, but this was a mission no one could hope to survive. Yet, somehow, he felt it was his duty to give everything he had to save humanity, even if it meant sacrificing himself. The next morning, the team gathered as Holt prepared for his journey. His suit was reinforced with the latest fireproof materials, designed to withstand temperatures that no human should ever endure. A helmet with a visor covered his face, and on his back was a pack full of tools that might help him survive long enough to figure out a solution. "Hi there, welcome to Jenny." The simple mode is perfect for creating single-speaker short voiceovers. Simply pick your preferred speaker, type or copy, and paste your script. Then, click the Generate button to generate your voiceover in seconds. You will see the voiceover output on the right for you to freely share or download. "For more advanced capabilities, video a good luck," Source said, placing a hand on Holt's shoulder. "We'll be here waiting for you." Holt gave a small nod before stepping into the transport vehicle that would take him toward the Inferno's core. As the vehicle soared toward the blazing heart of the firestorm, Holt could feel the heat through the reinforced walls. The air was thick with smoke, and the sky above him flickered with an eerie red glow. It was like flying into the mouth of a beast, but Holt wasn't afraid. He had faced danger before, but this was something far worse. As the vehicle reached the outskirts of the Inferno, Holt's heart raced. The temperature outside was rising, and the flames danced in a terrifying pattern, almost as if they were watching him, waiting for him to make a move. The transport came to a halt, and Holt knew it was time to go. He suited up, preparing himself for what would likely be his final journey. With a deep breath, he stepped outside the vehicle, the intense heat of the flames nearly knocking him off his feet. His suit, designed to endure extreme conditions, was already starting to hum with energy, stabilizing the temperature inside. But Holt knew it wouldn't last forever. He began his trek toward the heart of the Inferno, each step a struggle against the overwhelming force of the flames. The fire roared around him, but Holt kept moving forward. He couldn't stop now. The future of humanity depended on him, and he refused to fail. As he ventured deeper, the fire seemed to grow more violent, as if it was reacting to his presence. The ground beneath him cracked, sending shockwaves of heat that nearly knocked him off balance. His suit's systems beeped urgently, warning him of the rising temperatures, but he ignored them. He had a mission to complete, and nothing was going to stop him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Holt reached the core of the Inferno. The flames surged around him in a chaotic spiral, their heat unbearable. Holt knew this was where he would make his stand. The device he carried, a small, intricate piece of alien technology, was his only chance. He had to plant it in the heart of the fire, a device designed to disrupt the energy flow that fueled the flames. But as he reached out to deploy the device, something strange happened. The fire seemed to pause, as if it was waiting for him. Holt hesitated for a moment, his hand trembling, unsure of what would happen next. And then, in an instant, the Inferno surged toward him, faster than he could react. The flames engulfed him. For a brief moment, Holt felt the intense heat, his body pushed to its limits. But then, just as suddenly, the fire began to retreat. The device had worked. The flames started to flicker and die down, their power weakening. Holt's vision blurred, but he knew the job was done. The fire was finally losing its grip on the planet. When they found him hours later, he was unconscious but alive. His suit had saved him, but the Inferno had been defeated. Holt's sacrifice had paid off. The world would never forget the firefighter who faced the impossible and emerged victorious. Captain Evan Holt's legacy lived on, not in the cities he saved, but in the courage he showed when no one else could. His story would be told for generations, a reminder that even in the face of certain death, humanity could still rise to meet any challenge. Editing, or longer multi-speaker voiceover production, please check out the advanced mode instead. Your creative journey now awaits. Get started now.